and climate change. Now, what does it mean to produce that? Well, it means, for example, inventing new ways to new technologies to dispose of human waste. This is an endeavor that has occupied Bill Gates and the Gates Foundation for the last 10, 15 years, because they have shown that if we simply extend the water-based toilets and drainage systems to which a small percentage of the world population currently has access, if we extend that to the majority of the world population, the impact, the waste that these would produce and the ecological impact of these would be tremendous. And so what we need is to find systems that do not require water, that can dispose of human waste without water. Or for example, we need, another example of the technological innovation that we need is safe nuclear energy. We need to find alternatives to carbon fossil fuels, and nuclear is obviously one of the options, but the concerns with nuclear have to do with safety. So that means that there is a whole domain of technological invention that can help us mitigate and adapt. Now, at the same time, the motivation to invent more sustainable ways of life requires more than understanding the science of climate change or the capacity to design technological information. It requires also ethical frameworks that helps us aspire to live in more inclusive and sustainable communities, as well as an understanding of social systems and the development of ethical reasoning that help us integrate critical thinking about the current impact of climate change, our moral imagination, the personal motivation to act, and our competency to act in effective ways. So what does it mean then to educate for a green economy? It means that we need to rely educational planning to support a transition to a green economy needs to start with a strategy. Now, here are some facts. The existing forecasts of the economic impact of climate change on jobs indicate that about 6 million, a transition to a green economy at present worldwide, the oil, gas, and coal industries employ 18 million people. And the International Labour Organization estimates that a transition to a green economy is going to eliminate 6 million jobs by 2030, in the next 7 years, but also will create 24 million additional jobs during this period. Similarly, the ecological impact of climate change, for example, flooding in agricultural areas, will likely eliminate jobs for some people. And so a green strategy would plan jobs that can help those individuals who have been impacted by climate change sustain a livelihood in a new economy. And so the skills that are necessary, in addition to those skills necessary for job transitions, there are skills necessary for other adaptation and mitigation strategy. For example, the type of residence, the type of home, the type of abode that people should have, and the location of that home, or patterns of consumption. So let me quickly outline what this would mean at various education levels. And let me start saying that everything that concerns preparing for the jobs of a green economy impacts most directly higher education, as well as technical and general secondary education. The impact on elementary education, on primary education, or preschool education is more one of helping to create a foundation at those levels. So at the higher education level, how is it that higher education institutions could help transition to a green economy? With multi-pronged strategies that can integrate, that can create synergies between the work they do in their education programs for traditional degrees, their traditional education programs, in their extension and outreach, which involves both the lifelong learning opportunities that universities create to help already graduates reskill, as well as the partnerships of universities with cities, with government, and with businesses on the development of green economy strategies. But a multi-pronged strategy includes, in addition to the work of the university in education and in outreach, research and development for research universities, advancing fundamental knowledge as well as technologies to support the green economy transition. For example, I mentioned clean forms of nuclear energy, or ways to dispose of human waste, or new technologies of production that can help individuals earn a living in a more sustainable way. And then lastly, a multi-pronged strategy in higher education that can support the transition to a green economy should manage the carbon footprint of the university itself, managing the infrastructure and the resources of the university. So, for example, we know that the new jobs that will be created in a new economy include jobs such as renewable energy engineers, or eco builders, or recyclers in the circular economy, or urban farmers, or sustainability experts. And all of these basically require particular demands, particular skills. So there are opportunities for university to prepare people for these jobs of the future, of the green future. Now, in addition to that, universities should identify what are the transversal competencies that all graduates of the university across fields of study and career need in order to understand climate change and to transition to a green economy, to support that transition from whichever occupation and career they're preparing for. In addition to the transversal competencies, universities should identify specific learning standards, learning outcomes by field of study, as well as by occupation and career that would support such a transition to a green economy. Now, once those learning standards for transversal competencies and for career specific study are clear, the next step is to develop the capacity of faculty so they can deliver instruction that aligns to those learning strategies. And then lastly, that requires the creation of new programs for lifelong learning, short programs, diplomas, certificate through extension to basically help people who already have graduated from a university, but who need to reskill. So basically what we're talking about is belongs in the realm of university strategy. Universities need specific strategies or need to integrate in their strategic plans a rethinking of the kinds of skills that graduates and that past graduates are going to need to transition to that green economy. Now, moving on to secondary and technical education, obviously the goals at this level are to create a foundation for the skills that are necessary in a green economy. And that means establishing links between schools and workplaces. For example, providing students the opportunities for internships, particularly in those industries that are more connected to the economy of the future, or building partnerships between those industries and secondary and technical education. Similarly, at the secondary level, it's necessary to develop learning standards about climate change, as well as curriculum aligned with those standards and build the capacity of teachers. And that requires not the creation of a new subject, a new silo in the curriculum, but the infusion in the existing subjects and disciplines, in particular science, technology, design and innovation education or engineering education, and civic education, the infusion in those domains of the opportunities to develop the capacities that are aligned with the green economy. At the elementary level and the preschool level, I think what is most appropriate to do is to develop an environmental awareness and an appreciation for the natural world, as well as a scientific foundation to help students understand climate change. Now, let me offer a specific blueprint that can help enact some of the recommendations that I'm making here. In November of 2021, UNESCO published a report produced by a commission on the futures of education, which has three sections. As those of you on the call probably know, UNESCO in its history has, in three times only, established a commission to examine the challenges of the present and the future, and to derive the implications of those challenges for how education systems should respond. So on this occasion, the third of those 3 times that UNESCO has done such a thing, this report has 3 sections. The first section talks about what are the challenges that should orient the efforts of education transformation. And one of those challenges which receives considerable attention on that report is the challenge of climate change, along with the challenges of democratic backsliding, challenges of economic and social inequality and poverty, and the challenges created by the development of artificial intelligence and the displacements that this is causing in the world of work. The second section of the report talks about what needs to change in an education system so that students are prepared to address those challenges. And basically, what the report proposes is that it is essential to transform the culture of education. And this involves reimagining pedagogy, curriculum, the organization of schools, the very teaching profession, and the larger learning ecosystem. And in the context of our conversation today, what I would submit is that in order to support the transition to a green economy, pedagogy, curriculum, school organization, the preparation and organization of the work of teachers and the larger learning ecosystem need to be aligned with the development of those competencies that support a transition to a green economy. Now, to state the obvious, any curriculum is basically built, any instructional task is built on 2 hypotheses. The hypothesis that if I teach A, my students will learn B. And that if my students learn B, the consequences will be X, Y, and Z. Now, sometimes our hypotheses are just flat wrong. For example, I mentioned that in my book, Education and Climate Change, the first chapter I report the result of an analysis of the existing evaluations of climate change curriculum. And what I found is that most of those curricula are built on a hypothesis that looks more or less like what the following that you see in the screen. If we teach students about climate change, our students will learn that climate change is a serious challenge largely caused by human behavior. And if they learn that, if they learn those facts, they will undertake actions that will mitigate climate change. But that is a very incomplete hypothesis, very imperfect hypothesis, because A, the students may not know what those actions are that will mitigate climate change. In other words, they may realize that climate change is a real problem, but not be able to derive from that what is it that they should do that would be differently. Furthermore, those programs are not specifically designed to activate the disposition, the attitudes on the parts of students to act on what they know. And so we basically need better hypotheses, and we need a systematic process of evaluation of the existing programs. And this is one of the areas in which I think organizations like the Asian Development Bank and universities in the region could accelerate the process of development of a more effective climate change curriculum through research and evaluation of existing programs, not only stimulating the creation of new programs, but supporting research and evaluation as to their effectiveness. Now, a basic building block of all curriculum are intentional learning tasks. And this short publication of the International Academy of Education by Lauren Anderson and Anna Peslican basically describes, synthesizes 3 decades of research on what is powerful instruction. Basically, they say the kinds of instructional tasks that are most effective are those that engage students with authentic, relevant, and meaningful content. And that authentic means content that connects what students learn in school with the world outside the school. Relevant means that what students are learning, the tasks they're engaging in, aligns with values that are important to them. And meaningful means that it all makes sense to the students. The student can make sense of the instructional task. So those learning tasks are the primary building block of the curriculum. Basically, what you see in this approach is that an effective curriculum is one that is student-centered and that builds on student activity, where students engage in developing procedural knowledge, and as a result of that, develop conceptual knowledge. This requires the teachers to teach differently, to become the guide on the side of the students. And this requires an explicit focus on learning strategies in which one is explicit about expectations and where lessons basically build on problem-based learning, incorporating cooperation and reflecting the diversity of students' interests and learning needs. Well, these basic principles absolutely apply to the development of effective, of powerful climate change curriculum. Let me conclude sharing with you some of the highlights of another one of my books in which I present my theory of how to educate students as global citizens, how to bring to scale reforms to educate students as global citizens. And this is another open access publication which you can download freely online. And so what I argue in this book is that transforming systems at scale requires essentially a mindset that allows communication with people who think of the process of change very differently. So that mindset requires 5 different ways of understanding the process of change. And I'm proposing this framework as a tool, as an artifact that can help us think about how to bring to scale efforts to educate students so they gain the competencies that support the transition to a green economy. And the frameworks that I present in this book are a cultural perspective, a psychological perspective, a professional perspective, an institutional perspective, and a political perspective. In other words, transforming education systems at scale in Asia to do a better job, helping students gain the capacities for a transition to a green economy requires more than getting the right curriculum. It requires thinking through the process of implementing this curriculum at scale through these 5 perspectives. So what is a cultural perspective? Is one that seeks good articulation, good communication between what communities and other institutions with which schools interact expect of schools and the work of schools. A cultural perspective requires also understanding the drivers that sustain the deeply held assumptions that educators and parents have about what constitutes good teaching and good learning. And so certainly what the report of the Commission on the Futures of Education, of which I was a member, is trying to do is to create space in the set of cultural expectations. The report says what we need to do is to transform the culture of education. And to do that, we need to engage a broad range of stakeholders in conversations about what constitutes good teaching, good learning, what are the skills, what would constitute authentic learning. A psychological perspective is about using the science of teaching and learning to design powerful pedagogy. And this applies absolutely to the science of climate change. In my review of existing evaluations of curricula that taught climate change, of which I've already mentioned that the vast majority agreed that those curricula were effective in teaching students the science of climate change, but not in helping them develop the belief that they could make a difference, the self-efficacy. But there were some exceptions. There were some studies conducted by a researcher named Ojala, I believe in Sweden, in which she combined teaching the science of climate change with approaches of civic education, action-based pedagogies that engage students in some activities in which they contributed in some way to mitigate or to adapt to climate change. And it was only in those pedagogies that the students gained knowledge and skills about the science, as well as the belief that they could make a difference. So that's an example of how drawing on the existing science of learning, of how people learn, what's the connection between changes in the dispositional domains as well as changes in the cognitive domains can help us design more powerful instruction. A psychological perspective, of course, requires thinking about the breadth of skills that are necessary, drawing on concepts such as Bloom's taxonomy or more contemporary concepts of 21st century skills. A professional perspective is about developing the capacity of teachers to anchor their practice, for example, when they teach about climate change on expert-based knowledge. And the challenge here is one of building the capacity of teachers. As I've mentioned already, In my book, Education on Climate Change, I review evidence that shows that many teachers themselves declare that they don't have the knowledge to teach about climate change, let alone to understand what is involved in a transition to a green economy and how do we help students prepare for that. An institutional perspective is about recognizing that an education system is exactly that. It's a series of interlocking processes that include standards, curriculum aligned with those standards, pedagogy supported by that curriculum, quality of teachers and professional development that increases that quality, instructional resources, and assessment. And that all these processes and supervision, all these processes need to be in alignment with one another. So a proposal to more intentionally educate students to gain the competencies to transition to a green economy and to do that for all students requires, from an institutional perspective, making sure that all these various interlocking processes are in fact aligned with that goal, with the goal of helping people gain the competencies to transition to a green economy, because it is those learning goals and visions that drive the process of instruction. And then lastly, a political perspective is about understanding that there are multiple stakeholders that are affected by any proposal to reform the curriculum, and that it's important to map who they are, what their interests are, and to try to create the greatest possible support among a wide range of stakeholders with this proposal. In many places, the industries, for example, the carbon fossil fuel industries are extremely powerful. They are an important stakeholder. And efforts to transition people away from those jobs will need to figure out how to negotiate the politics so that those industries do not become the enemies of an effort to advance education, align with a view of a green economy. So those are the ideas that I wanted to share with you today. Essentially, we need to change our mindset about what does it mean to prepare for climate change, from cultivating climate literacy to helping students gain the capacities to transition to a green economy. And this requires drawing on well-established knowledge about how to produce, how to bring to scale education reforms and apply that to this goal. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Reimers, for highlighting your thoughts on education and climate change. We want to go now deeper on the high-level panel, and I would like to request all our panelists who are present in the room and our moderator to come on stage and take your seats. Please, sir. And Professor Reimers will participate also online. Please come on stage, madam. So we are going to explore now until 11 o'clock. We have a deeper dive on some of the aspects Professor Reimers raised, and we want to talk about reimagining human and social development for a digitalized and climate resilient economy. And I have the pleasure to introduce you to your moderator. Please give a warm welcome to the Senior Director at Human and Social Development Sectors Group at ADB, Ayako Inagaki.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's working. Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you very much, Fernando, again, for the very, very structured and very practical presentation. I know that, climate change is not really, it's not something that we say we put it in a curriculum because it's a trend. We leave it 5 years and then we move to another next priority, right? It's really, really about climate change is changing our lives. So how we really build capacity of our young generation as well as existing generation to, optimize the opportunities given by the green transition, green economy, at the same time address the challenges, right? So, and please stay online, Fernando, because we would like to get your insight as well. So I'm very pleased to introduce today our panelists. We have a range of, global and national experts in terms of education policy, practices, from first of all, from our developing member countries. First, I would like to introduce Dr. Romi, who is our Secretary of State, Ministry of Education, Youth and Sport from Cambodia. Romi has been also an honorable director of ITC, which is probably the best, one of the best technical college in Cambodia. Romi, as you could see, he has a long years in the academia also himself, studied also in Japan, in France, and then he's also a wonderful counterpart for ADB project in the secondary education, science and technologies, right? So welcome, Ronnie. Then we have Don, who is our Minister of Higher Education from Papua New Guinea. Don is leading education in Papua New Guinea, but I was quite impressed that actually he has been leading many positions in his own country, finance, treasury, transport as well, right? So, but now he's now leading education, which of course we all know in this community is the most important sector, right? So, and then I would like to introduce Lynn. Lynn is the professor from Thomas More Brennan Chair in Education, Lynn School of Education and Human Development in Boston College. She has been leading teacher education, and I do understand that before that she was in Columbia universities, right? Technical college, and where she has been receiving a lot of money, which is important, but extremely important is more because she's been leading some innovative teacher residential program. So we would like to hear also from the teacher education perspective. Then we have also online, I hope you're online, Rukmini Banerjee. She is the head of Pratham. I don't know if you heard about Pratham, which is one of the leading non-governmental agency in India, doing innovative teaching and learning program, starting really from the most vulnerable children in Mumbai. Now I understand that Pratham activities has really come across all the country. So welcome, Rukmini. I hope she's online. Anyway, so you heard from Fernando, and actually the topic was really both on impact of climate change in education as well as the digital transformation. But I think, you know, the discussion keynote speak from Fernando has focused more on climate change. So maybe you may want to, also from your perspective, the first question will be a general one. How do you see from your experience or from your education, your country education institution perspective, what are the innovation, what are the education reform that you think it's necessary? I know that I have to follow the instruction as a moderator, but let me just share with you that one of the most popular question that has come up already from the poll is, how early should climate change be taught? Should it be included in a basic education curriculum? You don't have to answer this question, but if you have some thought, you may want to include it because this is the most popular question. And if not, we can ask Fernando to answer later. So maybe shall I start with Robbie? Thank you very much. You should sit here. Up to you.
Before my response to the question, at first I would like to say thank you very much to the ADB for the always support to me, especially to my country. And also I would like to thank you also to on behalf of my minister that he's busy in his duty trip to Paris, that he's assigned me to join for this meeting. I think that this meeting is very important, but I want to talk more about, but because of time limits, I think that is only 5 minutes. We have to be stick on the point. 3 minutes, yes, I have to stick on the point. So this is important for me to share some you about what is the way that I would like to share. Especially, I fully agree with Professor Reimers to the point of education institution that is already adapted in the agile of the innovative way for the preparing for the future is ready. By the way, under the new government mandate, because this is the seventh mandate of our government, that human capital is important, need to be developed. And this is one of the 5 priorities in the Pentagon strategy that we have also setting up 5 priority action to reform the starting of the education system building throughout the improving the quality of education, the strengthening of all type of exam, reform of the higher education, including the youth development, public financial management, the private, including the finally is the forming of the core team to doing research for development. By the way, Ministry of Education, Youth and Sport in Cambodia also giving the 4 core priority that link to the first one is to revision of the design and the curriculum redesign, and also the extracurricular activity. The second is the priority with the need to strengthen of the student knowledge, discipline, ethics. Ethics is important, and the behavior. By the way, we also giving the priority to improve students throughout the health, through the nutrition, because nutrition is one of the key that can reinforce and strengthen of the body, human body of the student from the elementary school up to high school or university level. And the 4th priority is to encourage the participant for the parent. Community is important because we cannot be doing education without any supporting from the parent sector. This is one of the key. The one that related to the key 4 key tasks. For key tasks, we also thinking about the improvement of the digital education, because aligning digital education is one of the key. The other one, establishment the center of the excellence for higher education, and the system building for the capacity development. And the last one is the development of physical education for the youth, because youth activity important, that they are the core resource person for the country. By the way, science technology is a play important role, because this is the 21st century. We always talking about digital transformation, talking about what so-called we call the 4th generation of the 4th revolution industry. By the way, science technology is need to be aligned and reinforcement for the betterment of the country development. By the way, the improvement of technology in we call educational will contribute to process the achieving of the overreach national economic goal, because our country have clear vision that by 2030 we would like to change this country to become the middle income country, and then 2050 to become rich country. So how to move to the roadmap of this one, that the strategical and the plan about the boost up of human capacity is must be very important. One of the very key success that we already applied to the school in our country is the new generation school. Why new generation school already adapting for? Because new generation school is one of the key leading and as modeling for applying to the other we call a normal school, so that the key success can be comparing next later, because the time is already clear that we don't have much time to talk more. I would like to brief you just only the short point, and then I will explore more in case that I have the question. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Romy. I think, excellent. I think you you really, mentioned some important things like nutrition, also because of the climate change also impact food security. And obviously nutrition is so important when it talks about development of the children, right? So excellent. And then digital education, STEM, you mentioned that STEM education. Maybe on the second round question, you're talking about the new generation school. It'd be great to hear how you would like to integrate then climate change education through the new generation schools, right? That's going to be for your second question. So now let me turn to Don. So from your country perspective, then how would you like to go for education reform? I know you are leading the higher education sphere, and you heard from Fernando on what higher education can do. So what's your thought about education reform in your country?
Thank you, moderator, for this very important question. Let me, within my 3 minutes, acknowledge the Vice President, who spoke very wonderfully this morning. I enjoyed the speech. I also acknowledge those very esteemed experts from the various groups that are here to develop the policies in the education sector. And colleagues, I thank you to share with you my ideas on the questions asked here, and also share this moment of evidence with those of us in the front. I agree with what Professor Fernando said entirely. That's exactly what I think should happen in my country, in Papua New Guinea. The science today is completely different to what we learned 20, 30 years ago. Therefore, the knowledge on climate change, what is happening, the impacts, the risks should be taught at the early childhood stage, up to the echelon of the education structure, up to the higher education space. And higher education space should set the standard to have that standard there, so the lower the education structure can implement a standard. For instance, in Papua New Guinea, even before I talk about literacy and skill, I must have a standard that is international, that is collective. I do not believe that a country has its own standard. The country must have a standard that resonates well with the world's best practices. And that's what I'm focusing in Papua New Guinea, so that Papua New Guinea curriculum, the developments that we develop to educate the mindset has to be one that is agreed by all in the global community, that is the standard that all of us are educating our children on. And having that done, then I see skilling is very important. You must have skills. Just literacy alone is not good enough. You have to have the skill to mitigate through the challenge that we see. Like for in PNG, we host one of the largest rainforests in the world, but people would like to see the cash come in. So there is this temptation to cut down trees to sell to the rest of the world. So what do? You educate, you give them the skills in all these other vocational, the technical skills. So what I'm doing now is I've established a group called the National Skills Development Agency that is now working with the industry, not only in Papua New Guinea, but also within the region. And I'm using the Australia and New Zealand curriculum standard as the base for Papua New Guinea to develop its own curriculum that meets the standard. So I'm driving that. So even before we talk about anything else, we must skill our people. The youth must be skilled, and we must have the proper curriculums in institutions. I agree with the Cambodia, what they've done. They're looking at the children. They must be fed well, develop the mindset, etc., because it is not that easy in a developing country. You'll find malnutrition, sicknesses, diseases are some of those challenges that people cope to live with. So education, development of curriculum programs should be looked at a more holistic manner, looking at the health perspective, the social perspective, but also the skill for an employment. So you improve the employability, and it is easier to develop the other skills, like Fernando is saying. You must have some base level education skill first, so then to mitigate climate change, you mitigate because you already know what it is, and you're given that consistent training throughout the life of a person to mitigate those challenges. As far as the digitalization is concerned, let me say digitalization in the world over has caused a lot of disruption, but I think it is very good in many, many sense. In Papua New Guinea, I like to see all the universities and colleges, even the lower echelon of education system, paperless. We like to see virtual, online, e-libraries. I have a university called the Western Pacific University that is the first university in Papua New Guinea that will be paperless. I want to have libraries without books in it, without papers. Because if I have to use papers, I must cut the trees to produce those papers. So to help relieve the climate problems, let's save the trees by going paperless education system. And let me say, on the technical aspect, I would like to see also in Papua New Guinea, we are reforming to produce more technical education system than just STEM. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dom. Again, excellent perspective. I like the way you say that the curriculum needs to be holistic. You talk about really about improving, standard for learning. And you talked about, I think this is also what Fernando has mentioned, that the skills is key, and skills needs to be transversal, because our generation, younger, future, or existing generation, we need to address the actions on the climate-induced shock that is affecting the communities, the countries, and obviously globally, right? So excellent point. You mentioned about importance of skills. You emphasized that. You're talking about a skills development agency that you are setting up in Papua New Guinea. Maybe on the second round question, I don't know if you have good idea on then how you think about integrating, transversal skills for generation to transition to green economy, or if not, maybe what about at the university level? That would be great. Now, let me check if, Rukmini is online. Can you hear us? Oh, she said no. Oh, okay, thank you. Sorry. My apologies. Let me then. So maybe later on, right? Let's check. So maybe we'd like to hear from Lynn. As you know, for all of us working in education, we know that the most important actors are learners, right? At the same time, equally important is the role of teachers. So we'd like very much to hear from Lynn on how you think teachers can really play a critical role in this climate change in education. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. First of all, let me add my thanks to my fellow panelists, to ADB, to colleagues here. It is my first meeting, my first skills forum, so it really is lovely to be here with all of you today. And Fernando, lovely to see you. Sorry that you can't be here in person, but it's always great to listen to you. I'd like to start by just pulling out a couple of key points that I would just love to sort of connect with, because what you offered in your speech was so much wisdom and so much practicality at the same time. I think a couple of things that are important to remember is that much of what we talk about in terms of innovation is already in place. When we talk about child-centeredness, when we talk about meaningful curriculum and authentic content, those are not new concepts for any of us. So the question is, how is it that we have all this sort of wisdom and knowledge in place, but we're not able to scale it up and make it accessible to more children around the world? The second point that Fernando made that I think is so important, and Ayoko, you mentioned it as well, is this notion of transversal skills. We continue to keep content in boxes. And the reality is, even though we talk about it a great deal, we know that the problems of today are so complex, we have to break down those barriers. but how schools are organized, how curriculum is set up, how teacher preparation is structured continues to follow that 19th century model of discrete content areas, when in actual fact, we need to be not just breaking through boundaries, but creating new vocabulary and new ways of studying and learning and new ways of thinking about knowledge in order to address the serious issues that we're facing, particularly climate change. As a teacher educator, and someone who has spent most of her career working with teachers in teacher preparation, first at Teachers College, which is a graduate school of education at Columbia University, and then at the University of Hong Kong, where I was dean, and now at Boston College, I think it is critical that teacher education transform. We cannot just reform it or improve it. It has to be completely flipped upside down. And that is because learning and what it means to live in today's society has completely changed. So if that has changed, then teaching and teachers need to change too. But part of that change, we can't do it by ourselves. Teacher education programs are usually governed by governments and by states. The standards and the requirements are set down by politicians and by government officials. So the conversations about how that curriculum can be different and can break through the sort of disciplinary silos that I was talking about earlier must not begin there, but certainly must include that sort of partnership and conversation. The second is teacher preparation needs to be interprofessional, intersectorial, non-categorical. I always say to my own students, children are not categorical, but teacher preparation and teacher qualification is. We prepare teachers as specialists quite often, when in actual fact, the children coming into our classrooms come as whole, complete human beings, full of complexities and full of all kinds of issues, challenges, and puzzles that a single sort of lens will not completely address. I'll use my last 18 seconds to quickly answer the question that came online. When is too early? And I would say it's never too early. If you think about the fact that children come to school ready and eager to learn, and yet research has shown that by about primary 3, schools have shut them down. Something is happening between the beginning of school and early primary grades, where children move from being excited about learning to turned off to learning. So we need to start from the very, very beginning. And as a very good friend of mine, who's an excellent early childhood teacher, says, children are in the world stew. They may not understand everything that's going on, but they're listening, they're watching, and they have questions.
Thank you very much, Lynn. I think it's really the very, very important word from real practitioners in teacher education. And also you have gone through obviously a lot of, well, let's say challenges in when you want to introduce reforms on teacher education, right? And I'm pretty sure Don and also Romy understand also the type of challenges in teacher education. I like the way they say that teachers' preparations needs to be inter-sectoral. And then it is true that the way we are preparing our teachers is probably still on a, as you said, box. Whereas the children in this generation, but also we have to think about the next generation, right? Because we can't imagine the world in the next generation of the children will be coming. Unfortunately, probably the climate change risk is probably going to dramatically change in the world that we live in. So how we make it really livable, right, for the children, I think it's really how the teachers should address. Thank you very much for these very, very fundamental, things that you brought up. Unfortunately, I understand that Rukmini cannot join online. It's unfortunate because I really wanted to ask a question about how then about the vulnerable children in the rural area, right, facing already so many challenges in accessing quality education, and what kind of empowerment that should be given to them in addressing climate change. Hopefully, we can hear from her if we are lucky toward the end of the session. If not, we try to find some ways to do. Now, on the second round of question, there's some questions that were prepared, I think, already. Either you can answer these questions that you were given in advance, but really, Romy, if you can, you mentioned about these new generation schools, and those are really the promising model schools in Cambodia. So maybe, how would you like to integrate this climate change education, good learning standard, transversal skills, and how you want to integrate the inter-sectoral approach in the teacher education?
Okay, again, thank you very much for your question, especially in connecting to the new generation school that Cambodia already have been conducted very successfully. And you may know that there are between the difference between normal school and new generation school. The new generation school is providing full option, especially students, they can learning and adapting to the new technology. They have some creative idea that can be including in extracurricular. By the way, that we can comparing that the new generation school also have been do pass because they pass the exam, especially pass the exam for the high school with the high percentage with comparing to the other normal school. The concern is that the number of the new generation school is not big number. The reason is that why is not big. The reason is that the investment for the new generation school is like the other normal school, because we have to be compulsory equipped with the technology lab equipment, including the methodology and the well-trained of the teacher. And so this is one of the reasons that if we want to develop more, we have to invest more. So this I would like also to thank you again to ADB that allowing me to running one of a new projects so-called the Step Up. The science technology standing for upper secondary school is one of the target that we want to improving the quality of the other school, like resource school, network school, and other we call extra school that including in our priority activity. By this reason, you can see that in Cambodia, actually, we can say that this Cambodia is the one of the safe place in the region. We don't have any affected of the earthquake. We don't have any typhoon. But from time to time, the climate change have been what's called disturbing our environment. Some school now is turning to be what's called flooding of the part of the school. So this is one of the responsibility of government need to be thinking about the future of the education, how to mitigating about the flooding at the school side that disturbing, not allowing students to access to the school directly without any performance well performed. So this is one of the key issue. We also starting to introducing about the school information system that we can also controlling from distance, providing more, we call paperless, without using much paper. That is one of the point that we want to reducing the way of the stepping, but providing more technology, we call ethic. Ethic is the same time that we want to including in our initiative, especially now under working. The other one is important that you may know that we are learning about the good performance result from the new generation school. But by the way, starting from now, the government, the new mandate of the government, starting to make another school standard. And within this school standard, under the mandate, the new mandate, there are target for 1,000 of the school standard from the countrywide to turning to be standardizing by using because a special indicator to perform and to check those schools throughout the assignment of the people to keep in touch with the school, especially the people who working at the concerned ministry at the Ministry of Education, Youth and Sport, that they can also keep in touch and allowing the school themselves to check and to revise what is the performance that they have been done, is what the performance still is not yet. So by this one that we want to adding and providing more performance, giving the judgment that are correct or not correct. So by the way, throughout of this initiative, we hope that within this mandate, the end of the mandate of the new term of the Prime Minister, that the 1,000 of the school will be achieving in this. So this is one of the big reformation, and also that it contribute to the supporting of the GDP growth for the country. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Romy. As all of us who have been working, particularly from our client perspective, no, in the developing member countries, having a number of what we call this new generation schools, a good model schools, center of excellence, I think it's a very, very good strategy to demonstrate, how the best pedagogical methods, teacher educations can be integrated into the teaching and learning process. At the same time, it's so difficult when we scale up and you want to make it nationwide. That's always a challenge, right? So we are not going to solve this issue right now, but again, for the broader education strategy, policy, and planning perspective, this is also something that I would encourage all of us to think about that. Okay, so now let me turn to Don. I asked you about the Skills Development Agency and again, how to integrate climate change education into the higher education. But you can also, share any other thinking about education policies, innovations that you want to do in your country.
Thank you. Well, I think it starts with I agree with the speakers that we need to have an overall holistic change, overhaul to the education curriculum, especially in the area that I'm responsible in the higher education sector. Looking at the technical skills development sector, I have launched a reform to the existing the curriculum and programs that are taught or trained at those institutions. Why I've done that because I've seen a dynamic of new knowledge that is kind of imposed on Papua New Guinea that we must train our young people to understand and be prepared for. For instance, you've had the green carbon, now we have the blue carbon. We have our mangroves, we have our corals, we have the marine ecosystem. Science in the past did teach those things, but not in the terms of impact, the risks that those ecosystems face because of the climate change and how it affects human life. So I believe that in the curriculums that I've asked our universities and our technical institutions to develop, they should reflect that. So when a person comes out of a university or a technical college, he or she is now equipped with the knowledge, the know-how to addressing how the climate change is affecting our corals and our the green carbon. And there's another new concept that has come about, and that is carbon trade. My country, Papua New Guinea, has this diverse biodiversity that also contains one of the big rainforests in the world. And people, they want the money, they're cutting down the trees. And that is a factuality that we cannot deny. But how do I change them? I must work with international communities to develop those, to participate in the trades that benefit and compensate those who look after their trees. But that's a new knowledge. It's a new skill. To people to come in, people who understand the finances of this, the economics of that, and to enhance that knowledge understood by the rest of our people, you have to train that at universities, at the colleges, and therefore I alluded to earlier with what Fernando said earlier, that we should start those things at the earliest childhood school level. So these are becoming the realities today. The islands are taken over. So when I am introducing this reform to the curriculum, I'm telling my universities and the teachers and policymakers that the world has changed. The challenges are completely unprecedented and unmatched. Therefore, the skills that we must have must be to mitigate those challenges and risks so we succeed, not as just as Papua New Guineans, but also as members of the global community. We must work together. So if you ask me, how do we promote green energy or clean energy to create that resilience in the people, these are the areas that I see. We start where it matters, and that is the curriculum development. And I'm happy because my program that I have started in my country, it kind of coincides with this skill development forum hosted by ADB. So I'm very happy to be here to learn from all of these very important participants and presentations that I hear. And I can discuss with my people back to develop the curriculums, and I like to change completely from the mediocrity to something completely new. If I may also add that I'm seeing the future, if we continue to live in the present or in the past, we may be imparting knowledge and skills to our people who might not have a job 10 years, 20 years down the line. People may be going to school to do a job that does not exist today. Therefore, I think the aptitude to developing the ability in the child, in the student, to being a competent person, to adapt to changes, to creating training them the skills, the ability to how to adapt to abrupt changes, then mitigating and improvising as to how to live. I think that's where the challenge of curriculum development is. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, thank you very much. Very, very concrete example of the risk, I may even threat, no? If we don't take any action now from the education side, our next generation will suffer. And then the consequence of climate change obviously comes to the people who are currently doing certain job, but they may be told not to do that anymore, obviously, because of the climate change action, the commitment from each of the country. So what are the alternative good job that they want to get, right? So it's really about life's perspective that we need to think about. Later on, I think in the program, we'll talk about what we may call, I would call the people's dimension of just transition. As country, we commit to net zero economy. A lot of changes will happen to the life of people. So skills, job, education will be really the key. Thank you so much. So now, Lynn, you heard from Romy, you heard from Dawn's, and from your own experience and knowledge, what kind of insight, recommendations you can give from the teacher education reform, and what will be impact the future generation, not only in these two countries, but we are talking about the Asian and Pacific regions here.
Nothing like an easy question. So, first of all, do want to thank both of you for sharing the wonderful things that are going on and the efforts that you're making that are so important. So this idea of curriculum change, new generation schools, all those are critical, I think, to the future. So a couple of ways I'd like to respond to that. The first is we do need new curricula, without a doubt. We do need to think about what knowledge is of most worth, not just for the 21st century, which we are in, but for the future. But a great curriculum, no matter how beautifully, comprehensively, and substantively it is, requires an excellent teacher. So the question that I pose to you as leaders and to all of you as leaders in your own sectors, is teaching an attractive job in your country, in your region, in your sector? The reality is It's not for most. So we cannot expect amazing people to want to come into teaching when in actual fact, they look at a profession that is not very satisfying, that doesn't necessarily allow them to support their families, that thinks of teachers as kind of technical, skilled workers who need to be trained rather than intellectual leaders. So we really need to rethink what we mean by a teaching profession. Is it a profession at all, first of all? And second, who would want to join it? I was fortunate enough at Columbia University to work with the best and the brightest, people who graduated from the best institutions, had the best advantages in education, and I'm not necessarily talking about socioeconomic background. They were young people who could take on any challenge, and they chose to teach, quite often in the face of great resistance from their families, who said, "What? You're leaving law to go into teaching? What? You graduated from Princeton and you're going into teaching?" But they felt a moral commitment to future generations. That brought them into the profession. It didn't keep them there. What kept them there? The opportunity to think, the opportunity to be part of decision-making, the opportunity to innovate, and to use their talents in their classrooms. They were not simply deliverers of curriculum that someone else handed to them. They were makers. They were leaders. They were young people who were able to actually make a difference with other young people. I want to also return to a point that Fernando made earlier that I think is so, so important. We spend a lot of time telling about things. We are busy teaching something. We forget that we're actually teaching someone. So the fact is, all the knowledge that you have about climate change and all its impact has not changed the someone, as Fernando's research and his has amply told us. So to change the mind requires also a change of heart, requires a commitment. It requires ethical and moral responsibility. It requires seeing oneself inside the problem. And we have not been very good at doing that. So I think this idea of what will teachers be like? What should they do in this time of AI? I was just in a conversation with the Nobel Prize dialogue a couple of weeks ago when there was conversation about, well, do we need teachers anymore? The same old conversation that comes up every time we talk about technology, that technology will replace teachers. Well, that's silly. But teachers will not be the same. If AI can take care of a lot of the mundane tasks of what teachers are doing, what will teachers spend their time doing? Inquiring, supporting students in their emotional development, relationships, all this, connectivity through social media and technology. We have the loneliest generation of all time. Everyone has 1,000 friends on Facebook, and yet they feel completely isolated. That is what teachers should be doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lynn, to remind us about what we all have to think about educators, right? In this forum too, it's about our moral commitment. And as a teacher, obviously, it's really for me then how you change the mindset and you give incentives and you make teachers aware of the very, very critical importance job as teachers and also as, facilitating life of the next generation, right? That's this thing. It's very important. I would like all of you to think about that during the next 3 days. So now, Fernando, I think you heard a lot of excellent insight from our panelists. Now, we don't have much time, but then, oh, I lost the question. Anyway, you know what? There's one question that I wanted to ask you. So what do we do? Now, we talked a lot about the importance of climate change in education, But in the world, there still be some people who deny that. They said, oh, why do we need to talk about climate change? Education maybe has nothing to do with climate change. So we still need to sort of advocate, we still need to convince people who are not convinced, right? So can you take this question at this, thank you. What can we do about leaders who are climate denialists, who discourage any conversation about climate change, are still decision makers in many industries, right? So if you can take this question and at the same time, if there's any feedback to the excellent insight that were provided by the panelists, and if you can do it in 5 minutes, that would be great. And my apologies in advance for the audience, because I was told that we have only 5 minutes left. But I think, you know, what we can do is that this is not the end of the forum, and we encourage you to approach our panelists individually to continue the discussions, right? So let's do that way, and I give 5 minutes to Fernando. Thank you.
Yeah, what I have most often encountered in education is not so much people who deny climate change, something that is increasingly difficult to do if you just open the window or read the newspaper, but it's the following argument. Given that schools fail to do the most basic things, like teaching kids how to read and write and basic numeracies, is it reasonable to also ask them to take climate change into account? And I think that that objection, which is common, it is at the core of many current conversations about what is foundational literacy, what should be prioritized, particularly in the global south. I think that conversation reflects a very black box view of what education is, a view of people who are many, many thousands of feet removed from the school. Because when you learn things like reading, you learn that reading something, this notion that we have to choose between foundational skills and helping students develop caring for the environment and deep understanding of how our actions are changing it, and deep understanding of the science of climate, and deep commitment to being part of a different way to relate to the environment. That notion that we have to choose between one of the others, I think reflects a misunderstanding of how curriculum works in practice, where you can have where you can have objectives that cut across the various curricula, but also reflects a poverty of aspirations for our schools should do, that has a very dangerous self-fulfilling quality to it. I think one of the principles of education, both for teaching students, but also for managing systems, is that our students and our systems will descend to our lower aspirations for them or rise to our highest aspirations for them. So that objection that we can't do climate change because we have very basic things to do, in my experience, runs contrary to how does one develop engaging curriculum for students as well as for teachers. With I think this has been a wonderful conversation, a wonderful panel, and I'm so delighted that the Asian Development Bank has put education front and center, not only because it is, if you think about the framework offered by the Sustainable Development Goals, one of the important goals, but because it is foundational to all others. It is foundational to what kind of life, what does it mean? What does development actually mean? How does that translate into human flourishing and well-being? But also it is foundational to something we haven't talked very much about, but which is very important around the world, including in the region that you're in, and that is peace. I think we must remember that it's so much easier to fuel violence than to sustain peace, in part because peace requires very educated people, deeply educated people. And I think that for that reason, because of the vulnerability, the fragility of peace, and the risks of violence which loom around every corner in every society, including in the United States where I am, but including in many societies in Asia as well. I'm so pleased that you have made a discussion of education and a real priority in education for this forum. I would like to just conclude suggesting that I think the art of bringing good ideas and good ambitions and idealistic ambitions for education to practice is about finding small steps that can be executed not in the future, but Monday morning. And I'd like to conclude with 3 specific steps, which I think would help us carry some of the ideas which have been discussed into a reality. For universities, all universities have to do strategic plans, and they do it every 3 years, every 5 years. It is something that is part and parcel of the life of a university. So a very small tweak is to ask for those plans to explicitly address climate change, for those plans to say in what way is the plan aligned with a strategy that can help us adapt to mitigate and revert climate change. Not really asking very much. A second baby step, which we can build on, would be to ask universities to begin counting the things they already do to address climate change or to promote sustainability more broadly. Because counting those things, making those things visible, would make it possible for universities to learn from one another. And a good platform to facilitate that was created 5 years ago by the Times Higher Education, the publication which I'm sure all of you in higher education know, among other things, because for a very long time they have been compiling traditional rankings of university quality that are based on very conventional metrics of success. But 5 years ago, they adopted an alternative set of rankings where they offered the same universities, about 3,000 universities participate in the traditional rankings of the Times. They said to those universities, why don't you tell us what you're doing about poverty and about gender equality and about peace and about climate action? And they began to report that information. So anyone who's curious, I've just written a paper on what higher education can do about addressing climate change based on that observatory, basically going to those rankings and looking at what they tell us about the places that are most effectively, most intentionally addressing climate change. So that's a second baby step, which is start counting what you do. Just the exercise of counting and reporting it will change the conversation within your university, but would allow a conversation with others. And the third baby step is let's start documenting the good things that are already happening around the world and align with our conversation and learn from them. With my graduate students a few years ago, we did study the new generation schools. They are in a book that we published on education for the 21st century. It's relatively easy to study the things that exist, and the world is a rich and wonderful laboratory in practice and in innovation. So I don't think we need to necessarily invent the wheel. We can learn very much from what already is, from what exists, from this rich reservoir of practice of innovation in education around the world. So these are 3 suggestions to conclude our very rich discussion today of things that we could all start doing Monday morning, come Monday morning.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Fernando, you've been always so structured, practical, knowing the range of challenges that our country is also facing when it comes to changing education. So I really like very much these baby steps. It's baby step at the same time, maybe from my side, is that can as a community really increase the awareness that the situation is become urgent. It's really not something, oh, we can start tomorrow, right? It's urgent, urgent, urgent. So let's take urgently the baby step that Fernando has mentioned to us. So again, thank you very much for Fernando, and I would like to please join me in thanking our panelists. Thank you, Romy, Don, and Lynn. And again, this is not the last time, so please approach our panelists. I don't know if Fernando can be reached by, AI platform or anything, but let's continue this discussion. This session was really to set the tone about how we can reform the education and training system. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ayako, and all the panelists. Good night to Professor Reimers. You saw that we had a lot of quality, high quality questions. Even we were not able to address more than one, and you didn't even see the question on the screen. We are very grateful for these questions because they help us to learn what are the questions we have to answer, hopefully many of them in this forum. So please keep on asking questions, and we also thank our online participants to do that. You saw that you can upvote the questions, so hopefully in the next panels we will be able to answer some of them. So secondly, there is a graphic recording group called Pushpin, and they are trying to capture for us some of the key messages. You will have access to all these things. So here is already the one on this session. And for every session in plenary, and I try to be more transparent here, so I'm not in the way. For every session, you're gonna have one of these pictures. Maybe a nice way of reporting back at home as well. Without further ado, we are going to meet at 11:30 Manila time. 11:30, 5 minutes delay. So also for our colleagues online, at half hour, we are going to assemble for the second session on unlocking the future of learning. So please be mindful that people are online, so don't be late. So 22 minutes of conversation over coffee and snacks. Okay? Please, outside, refresh yourself, continue the conversation. See you in 22 minutes.